Welcome, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us tonight for what promises to be a fantastic discussion about the experience of multiple sclerosis patients, how to accelerate the development of effective treatments, which we're working at NYSCF and elsewhere, and how patients play an important role, really a critical role, in the process of realizing the promise of new therapies. The patient voice is something that I'm very committed to, that everyone at NYSCF and everyone at Lyfebulb is committed to. And we're thrilled to be jointly hosting this panel with Lyfebulb, a fantastic organization that we've been involved with, I think, since they began. They're truly a kindred spirit to NYSCF in that Lyfebulb is centered on patients and the patient experience as the key to understanding and relieving the burden of chronic disease. I have always believed in the power of the patient voice and patient-driven research. I started NYSCF as a patient advocate for type 1 diabetes, another disease that Lyfebulb works on extensively. So we are really delighted to have Lyfebulb CEO and founder Karin with us today, and her colleague Teresa. The value of engaging patients in research and research being guided by a dialogue between scientists and clinicians, patients, and all stakeholders has never been more apparent and really more necessary, particularly in cutting edge approaches. You know, with patient participation and understanding, these novel approaches like stem cell-based research and therapies truly can reach their promise for devastating diseases like MS and many others. MS has always been one of the main diseases that we work on at NYSCF, led by our absolutely outstanding scientist, Dr. Valentina Fossati, whom we will hear from today. And we also are really thrilled to have Dr. Tim Coetzee from the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, who can share both the scientific and patient-centered perspectives of a disease-focused nonprofit. Before we begin, I would like also to recognize the transformative partnership and critical support of the Stavros Niarchos Foundation, who helped make our external education and outreach programs possible. We currently have a matching grant challenge from them to help ensure that we can continue this work. So if you enjoy this program and our other virtual programs, any support that you can give to our education programs will be doubled. And now it's my great pleasure to welcome all of our panelists and to introduce Dr. Raeka Aiyar, who is NYSCF Vice President of Scientific Outreach, and Raeka will moderate today's discussion. So without further ado, Raeka.
Thank you so much, Susan. I'm really delighted to be here. I'm honored to be moderating this really exciting discussion on a very important but often overlooked disease. And so it's really going to be fun to discuss today how we can all work together towards a brighter future for these patients. Apologies. So I want to just dive right into it with all of these panelists that we have with us here today. Each of you are playing really critical roles in research and or advocacy for multiple sclerosis. So I'd like to start off by hearing a bit about your journey to your current work and what you're currently focused on and what this work means to you. So Karin, I'd like to start with you. You're the co-founder and CEO of Lyfebulb, our partner for this event, as Susan mentioned. You're an MD and PhD with nearly 20 years of experience in the life science sector. And you started Lyfebulb to reduce the burden of chronic disease by empowering patient entrepreneurs and ambassadors. Could you tell us a little bit about that work and your journey that brings you here today?
Well, first, thank you so much for inviting us and inviting me again. It is truly a pleasure, and it's an honor to be working with Susan and with you and with the entire organization at NYSCF. I believe very strongly in what you do. I've been following you many, many years before Lyfebulb and of course with Lyfebulb. And I share Susan's passion and also the origin of I think our commitment, which is type 1 diabetes. MS is the discussion today. My own disease is type 1 diabetes that I've lived with for 31 years. And it has caused both, I guess, opportunities, but also tremendous hurdles. There is not a day that doesn't go by for me not to think about a cure. I also have, I think, a unique perspective when it comes to NYSCF, in the sense that I'm kind of the 1.0 of stem cell therapy, because I have a pancreas transplant, and which has to a certain extent cured type 1 diabetes. But of course, I live with severe immune suppression, which is something that is a reality also for many people living with multiple sclerosis. So I can identify with that. So again, my commitment to life sciences started really 31 years ago with my diagnosis of type 1 diabetes. It was, I immediately knew that I wanted to be part of this sector. I wanted to direct my energy, my intellect, everything that I had toward finding cures, finding treatments, improving the lives of those living with diseases such as mine. I learned pretty quickly during my education that diabetes was similar to many other diseases. Autoimmunity and immunology was something that is truly interesting to me. And I also learned through my patient experience that what we experience as individuals living with the disease can really help others living with other diseases. There are many similarities between patients living with cancer, living with type 1, living with MS, living with IBD. And we need to share those experiences, and the scientists need to share those experiences to improve treatments and eventually find cures. And there are very few areas such as stem cell therapy where it is so very true in that. So when I started Lyfebulb together with two fantastic friends and colleagues now 6 years ago, it really was with the goal to close the gap between patient communities where I was a part, as well as industry and in companies where research was being conducted, led by professionals who were so-called trained in the area of science and medicine. I had experience as a professional and always used my experience to try to find better solutions, but I hadn't leveraged my experience as a patient for those many years. And it really dawned upon me upon my transplant that my experiences as a patient were incredibly valuable in identifying opportunities and even solutions to problems, because no one knows as well as those who are living with the disease what the unmet patient needs are. So at Lyfebulb, we call ourselves a patient empowerment platform. We work very closely with targeted patient communities where we identify insights, journey mapping, unmet patient needs, and then we take one more step in that we try to solve those issues together with our patients. So we are a nimble startup, a company that is growing, but we have a very large community of individuals such as Teresa as part of our ambassador pool, our entrepreneurs. And our goal is to improve the quality of life and to connect people with one another. I'll finish by saying that there are two really foundational principles for Lyfebulb. One is that patients need patients. We need to enable connectivity so that we can learn from those who have been where we are right now. If I had met a young woman at the time or a girl when I was diagnosed who could have taught me more about type 1 diabetes, I probably would have had a better journey with it upon diagnosis. That's what I want to enable now. So connections are very important. And as Lyfebulb, we are now launching digital platforms where this can be scaled and be done globally. We're doing it first in transplant. We're adding and hopefully an MS soon. The second foundational principle is that patients can be innovators. And we'll hear today from fantastic innovators. Both Tim and Valentina are innovators, proven innovators. But Teresa, as our patient, is also an innovator and a judge who has been part of an innovation challenge that we ran recently. So I hope we will be able to share that during this time. And I really thank you so much for having us on this panel.
Thank you so much, Karin. That really underscores the value of the patient perspective in driving this research. And so thank you for all of that great work that you're doing. I want to move next to Valentina Fossati. So Valentina leads NYSCF's Multiple Sclerosis Research Program, as Susan mentioned. And Valentina, you are a PhD stem cell biologist who's invented some of the most effective methods in the field to create different brain cells from stem cells to be able to model diseases like multiple sclerosis. And you also bring the truly unique perspective of being a patient of the disease that you research. Can you tell us about that experience and what your research is currently focused on?
Sure. Thank you. It's very pleasure to be here today. So I'm a stem cell biologist by training, and I was working in my postdoctoral studies when Nobel laureate Shinya Yamanaka made his groundbreaking discovery that adult cells, like skin cells or blood cells, could be turned into stem cells, and what he called induced pluripotent stem cells. And this was a science fiction becoming reality. It was a really groundbreaking discovery because for the first time, we would have the chance to ask a patient to provide just a few drops of blood, and from that making stem cells, and then be able to make in a dish all the patient's derived cells that we wanted. So brain cells for studying brain diseases, or pancreatic cells for studying diabetes, and with the patient there alive. So this was completely a game changer in the field. And of course, I embraced it like all the other stem cells biologists. And I was thrilled to apply it to my own research. But exactly in the same time, I got diagnosed with MS. And so I started reading a lot about the disease. I tried to see everything that was known, but I really focused much more on what was not known, on the etiology of the disease. And so I realized that there were many studies on the immune cells. So people have been focusing very much in trying to understand why the immune cells, the B cells, these T cells are infiltrating the brain and are attacking these myelinating cells of the brain, the oligodendrocytes. There were many animal models, but from my perspective, as a stem cell biologist, I saw what can my background help? How can I contribute to this field? And so I realized that, really, obviously, because before was science fiction, we were unable to work on the brain cells from the patients in addition. But now, thanks to the induced pluripotent stem cell technologies, I had the opportunity to continue my career toward that path. And so I really dedicated the last 10 years, as you said, in trying to develop these recipes so that we could learn to make all the different cell types that we find in the brain. So the cells that are myelinating in the brain, but also other cells that we can talk about later that are involved in the disease. And so this is something that opens up opportunities for studying directly MS, but also for other neurodegenerative diseases in which all these cells are affected. And so we're also studying Alzheimer's disease and Parkinson's disease, for example, on NYSCF. And so the beginning, really the previous year, we're really building blocks into creating all these cell types. And now we're moving to really much more exciting studies on really testing drugs into the patient cells to see, to really hopefully, with the goal of creating the new generation of drugs that will help the patients in the future.
Thank you, Valia. And we'll talk a bit more about exactly what we're learning from these stem cell models shortly. But right now, I'd like to move on to Teresa Wright Johnson, a Lyfebulb Ambassador, MS patient yourself, an activist, a speaker, and so many more things. Can you talk to us, Teresa, about your journey as a patient advocate and the issues that matter to you the most?
Yes, Raeka. First, I'd like to say thank you for having me. I am excited to be here. As we already heard about the power of the patient voice, I truly personify the power of the patient voice. My patient journey began at birth. I was born with the congenital heart defect. So this has been my journey my entire life. What I've learned is to stand in my truth. What I've learned is to use my experiences to empower others. My diagnosis of multiple sclerosis came in 2014. And though I was already what many would consider a seasoned patient, we all know with new diagnosis comes new normals, new limitations, and things that we don't necessarily foresee or prepare for. So I just remember my initial diagnosis. I felt shocked. I felt sad. It was very lonely, and I could not think of anyone who resembled me. There was no one that I could reach out and say, can you tell me about this? Can you share this experience? What do I look for? And even the literature was very limited. So I resolved to use my life just as I have for every other cause. I resolved to use my life, my professional experience in human services and public service, my personal experience in being a patient, and propel advocacy forward to let people know that they aren't alone, to let people understand that a diagnosis is not the end of life, to just as Karin spoke previously, to say, you know what, there are people out here who are going through this. There are people who can be here with you, who can be here for you. That is very important. So I'm very committed and I'm very passionate about standing and advocating for this cause. And as advocates, we empower people. We empower people to take charge of their health. We empower people to learn about their health. And once you become empowered, you go out and you empower another. And that's what I find is so rewarding and fulfilling about this work. And I also want to say one of my passionate platforms for this advocacy work is representing all that I am. I'm a Black woman. We are underrepresented. And I just want to be a vessel that will inspire and empower through my life experiences and through the experiences of others, so that we can move innovation forward, so that we can inspire another, so that we can work together to find a cure, and so that all of those who are underrepresented know that not only are they entitled to healthcare and representation, but that if we don't move this forward, then we're really not where we should be.
Thank you, Teresa, for those very powerful and inspiring words. And we will definitely come back to that topic of underrepresentation and health inequity in the rest of our discussion. I now want to bring on our final panelist, last but not least at all, is Tim Coetzee, the National Multiple Sclerosis Society's Chief Advocacy Services and Science Officer. Tim, you lead the Society's efforts to drive public policy, programs, and services for people with MS and to fund innovative research all over the world. You also bring experience as a PhD and researcher who has focused on MS before. Can you tell us a little bit about your journey through research and advocacy and what challenges you're currently focused on in your role at the Society?
Sure, thank you, and it's really great to be with you and this panel. I'm excited to join such a great group to be able to share some of the really remarkable changes we're seeing in MS today. So my journey to MS actually started in about 1993 when I was a fellow. I had just finished my PhD in actually RNA biology. So now that we all know what RNA is about with COVID, I had actually worked in that area and had taken an interest in understanding the role of that molecule in the brain and really completely switching gears. And, my journey in connection to MS began by going to work in a lab that focused on understanding some of the aspects of RNA in the brain, and that was funded by the MS Society. And that actually started me understanding the nature of the disease. At that point, I was largely just a science nerd, sort of focused very much on the brain and its structure and not really thinking about the disease or the people aspect of it. But it was the infusion of being in an environment where the funding organization and being around people with MS and understanding the experience of people living with MS that changed my worldview around this. And, I came into the field a couple of months after the first disease-modifying treatment of beta-seron was approved in July of 1993. So really at the very early stages of what became a really pivotal, transformational event in this neurological disease, and in terms of the first treatment. And then now we've had our 20 plus treatment approved recently, and sort of witnessing how the disease has changed in substantial ways, but also witnessing some of the challenges that still remain to this day underlying the surface that we need to really raise up. And I think that journey, which was largely focused on understanding the roles of myelin and remyelination and all of the aspects that go into the cells that are damaged in MS, brought me to the MS Society, where I've had the privilege of being part of both our research teams and engaging in really facilitating the training of the next generation of MS researchers, as well as some of the cutting edge research we fund, but also now really focusing on the way science and people and advocacy and policy all intersect with each other to change the journeys that people experience living with MS, and recognizing that, without effective public policy, it doesn't matter if we have 50 disease modifying treatments. If people can't access those treatments or can't afford them, then we are actually failing our community. And also addressing, the aspects of supporting people with MS in their journey, recognizing that each of the nearly 1 million people living with MS is on a very distinct and unique journey, and that our role is to be that supportive partner along each person's unique journey, and really continuing, the vision of our founder, Sylvia Lowry, who started off really with a plea to, will anyone who has recovered from MS, and this was in 1945, write to me. 50 people wrote to her, and that, 50 people seeking connection. And, I fast forward to today, 75 years later, it's still all about that. It's all about connection. It's all about surfacing the challenges and coming together to find solutions. And that's what I'm privileged to be a part of and to do every day.
Well, thank you, Tim. This is such important work. And I think many of you have really underscored the value of that advocacy and really making change happen. So I'd like to talk now a little bit more about the disease itself. So MS is defined by the National MS Society as an unpredictable disease of the central nervous system that disrupts the flow of information within the brain and between the brain and the body. So can you talk about, each of you, what is the current understanding of what happens in MS, and how does this play out for patients? It's referred to as a neurodegenerative disease as well. So, Valentina, I'd love to hear from you a bit more about what we know about what causes this neurodegeneration. And so does
Yeah.
Start. Yeah, Valentina.
As the challenge of this disease is that, if you ask me, what is causing MS, unfortunately, after over 150 years that we are studying it, we still don't know. We don't know the exact cause of the disease. But we have learned many things, and especially, as Tim was saying, in the past 20 years, many, over a dozen, now 20 drugs have become available. So how do these drugs work? They're called disease-modifying therapies because they can, in some cases, really act very well. And for some patients, they're really, making blocking the disease and making the patients feel much better. So all these drugs are targeting the immune cells because in MS, these B and T cells that we have usually in our body, and now you've heard a lot also about the COVID, those are cells that are usually working against infections from viruses or from bacteria. But in MS patients, they infiltrate in the brain and they damage the cells in the brain. So primarily the hallmark in MS is this oligodendrocytes, which are the myelinating cells of the brain. So we are all very familiar with the neurons, which are the cells that connect the brain with all our body, that allow us to do all the movement and thinking. They're really sending the electrical signs. But to do their job, neurons are always insulated by a sheath layer of myelin, which really protects them and also allows for this very fast conduction that we have in large animals. So this is very important. Without the myelins, the neuron will die. And what happened in MS is exactly this, that the immune cells are in different ways attacking the myelin, and so causing this degeneration of the myelin, which eventually leads to the death of the neurons. It's also a lot more complex, and so you have heard of different type of MS, and maybe Tim can also discuss more about this. So there are some patients for which we call relapses, relapsing remitting phase, where you have this focal area of damage of the myelin, and depending on that area, you have a particular symptom, very common, for example, in the optic nerve. So you may have vision loss due to this damage specifically in this region, rather than other symptoms that are related to other regions. But then with the time, with the patient that we call progressive, instead of having this specific episode, specific relapse, you do have an accumulation of neurological disability. And so, this is the real challenge right now, is to be able to understand and cure this progressive MS and this general neurodegeneration that occurs, because the drugs that have been discovered, starting from the interferons and all the drugs that came up later, have been doing, in some cases, a really remarkable job in stopping the relapses. So avoiding that patients have these relapses. Some patients have, maybe a few in a year, and then with the drugs, you are basically free of relapse. But unfortunately, we still don't have very effective treatment for patients that are very progressive, that have already acquired a huge disability. Patients, for example, that are no longer able to walk well, or they are in a wheelchair. And so to restore what has been lost is still something that we need to achieve. I don't know, Tim, if you maybe want to add something to that.
Yeah, no, I think Valentina, really, you captured it. And I think one of the reasons I am optimistic that we're going to be able to make progress around addressing the challenges in progressive MS, but also even more progress in relapsing MS, is as we now have the tools to be able to understand what is causing nerve damage and neurodegeneration and the loss of nerve cells, that we can now begin to intervene and really tackle some of those underlying aspects. And I think will get us to a future where we can also begin to tackle the aspects of the disease that are often invisible. Individuals will say, I see relapses, I see you're having walking challenges. What is often unseen is the fatigue, the pain, the cognitive challenges, all the neurodegenerative aspects which lie below the surface, and oftentimes are the biggest. When I speak with friends who have MS and others, that is the frustration when people say, I wouldn't know you have MS, and to which you want to say probably some uncharitable things in return when you hear that. But that's because the individual doesn't know that MS can have so many effects that are invisible. And the biology behind those effects are very challenging, but the powerful thing is we have the tools like what New York Stem Cell Foundation is doing with the stem cell research, but also other international collaborative efforts that are really revealing what is at the root of that. And also, because of the power of technology, being able to use tools like advanced MRIs to be able to probe and understand what is different about the structure of MS as a person moves through their journey. And it gives me hope that in the coming years, we'll actually have a series of treatments that go beyond disease modification, but to potentially stopping the disease in its tracks. And as you say, really restoring what's been lost and recovering to full functionality is what we have to go for with our community. And when I started in the MS community, nobody was willing to talk about the idea of recovery of function. You would have been laughed out of the scientific meetings if you thought about it. And yet today we're now talking about myelin repair strategies. And so I think, to me, that's the power of where we're at, and gives me a lot of hope for the future.
Thank
Can
you.
I add to that?
Yeah, please do.
Yeah.
Karin. Yeah.
I find it fascinating, again, coming from looking at many autoimmune diseases and thinking about this from the perspective, think about IBD with mucosal repair, right? I mean, in Crohn's and colitis, we did not even think about, recovery in that sense before. And now we're seeing that that is even an endpoint in clinical trials. So, and the same thing, I mean, if we go back to type 1 diabetes, I mean, again, it's relapsing remitting in many cases where you have beta cell destruction, but it's much, much further along, because at that point, the whole pancreas is destroyed, or 90% is destroyed. So I do think that there will be multiple ways of dealing with MS in the future, which we may not we may not think about right now. Because one interesting question that I have after listening to Valentina and Tim, would be, the cognitive dysfunction, the chronic fatigue, the fogginess that is associated with MS more as a continuous issue. Is that going to be repaired? Is that even addressed with the current treatments, and the prolongation, is it addressed through stem cell therapy? Again, drawing upon comparisons with other diseases, when you repair a person with type 1 with a new pancreas, you still have retinal damage, you still have nephropathy, because those things are not repaired. So we need to think about the disease as comprehensive, addressing the overall body. And I would love, sorry, Raeka, but Teresa, is perfect at addressing, what are those overall systems symptoms that are so terrifying in many cases.
Absolutely.
Please, Teresa, I'd love to hear from you about that,
Yes,
and especially on the aspect of each patient's experience being so unique. Can you talk a bit about that as well?
Absolutely. Everyone has a different experience, and we're learning the science behind the disease, as you just heard Tim speak about. But let's talk about the symptoms, the physical aspects, like was mentioned, that you don't see. And this is where the patient comes in. This is where their account comes in. This is why the patient is so powerful and is such a pertinent part of this conversation, because that's where we get this information from. That's where we learn not only how the disease manifests, but how it shows up. So for someone like me, one of my main symptoms is pain. Pain is really understudied in this space. So, we just have to, when we treat multiple sclerosis and we look at the disease as a whole, you have to look at the entire person. You can't just look at the cells and the scientific makeup. You have to look at how the disease manifests in each person. That's important. That will determine someone's quality of life. And when we are devising these treatments and we're moving forward, we have to take all of these things into account, a person's experience, because as a patient, yes, we want longevity, we want longer lives, but we also want a better quality of life. That's important. And we want to be active participants in our quality of life.
Absolutely.
And if I could piggyback on what Teresa just shared, I think that's one of the, in the last 5 to 7 years, that I have seen the transformation of the research community, and the perspective that Teresa shared about it's not just about the science, it's about the science and ensuring that I, as a person living with MS, affected by MS, am able to live fully in life. And yes, what I hear is, yes, pursue the myelin repair and figure out the pain, figure out what's going on with cognition. And I'd say that's been one of the biggest changes about how the community and people affected by the disease are coming together to be able to really shine a light on where are our biggest gaps, and then figure out how to focus on those areas that improve quality of life. It's filled with opportunity, and also I think a great challenge, I think, to the scientific community to really redouble our efforts around focusing on what matters to people.
Absolutely. And can you talk a little bit more about what's known about the sort of biological reasons for these different symptoms and the variation in these symptoms across patients?
That's a great question. So, so I think, when we think about MS, what are the triggers for MS? Oftentimes it's a factor of combination of genetics, exposure to different environmental factors, whether it's Epstein-Barr virus or low vitamin D, or potentially smoking now is a potential risk factor. a variety, which unfortunately there's no single element that we can point to, but we do know that it's a combination of variables, and that it is those variables early in life that probably set a trajectory that a person's experience goes through. And we also are now beginning to learn the importance about how race and ethnicity play into this, and the factor that for too long our understanding of the disease has largely been defined by studying the disease in Northern European settings, but we now know that is just flatly incorrect, and that there's important work around the fact that Black women have a higher risk factor for developing MS relative to white women of the same age, and that this really is a result of just a historic not looking in the right places and really looking to understand. And those are some of the gaps we actually need to fill in much quicker. But we're also understanding that race and ethnicity play a role in the severity of the disease as well, and that really teasing out those differences really will help us, I think, treat MS for the entire community. And that's the part that looking at holistically is essential. We also are beginning to learn by studying MS in the very youngest populations. What's little known as children do develop MS. It's not a large number of children, but as early as 6, we've had instances of young people diagnosed with MS. And we're learning in those very younger stages what are some of the triggering factors that can also help us understand who's at risk of developing MS in the adult population, and sort of general, what we would be more traditionally known MS age of diagnosis. But in the end, it does, Valentina, Raeka, come down to, it's a combination of genetics, exposure to risk factors, but there are also things that we can begin to start thinking about, actions people can take. What are some of the actions that, if a person lives with MS and they have a child who, is, because if you have a child with MS, that child has a slightly higher risk of developing MS. What are some of the behaviors that we can engage in, attending to things like vitamin D levels, attending to different aspects? And that's a part of the conversation we weren't having 10 years ago. And now, because of the volume of research, we're able to really pull it all together. And to Teresa's point, this comes back to people living with the disease shining a light on the issues we need to keep our eye on, and changing the conversation. The one other aspect I'd say that's changed substantially in the last 10 years is the speed of diagnosis. We're much faster at diagnosing the disease today because of the tools we have. And so that actually is reducing some of the uncertainty, but also creates an importance of also understanding that doctors have the tools they need to diagnose accurately and quickly.
Yep, that's great. And I want to come back to the point that you made about the more severe effects that we see on Black patients, and Teresa, to your work in health equity and being a staunch advocate for factoring that into what we do. How do you take that on as an advocate?
Well, first, I got myself involved in different organizations. I think, again, patients' voices have power. And I can think of one of the first organizations I got involved in is I Conquer MS, which is an initiative of the Accelerated Cure Project. And that's when patients and people who are interested in multiple sclerosis and who want to work toward a cure. We come together and we try to address these issues. As a Black woman, I connect with other patients. I encourage other patients. I tell them, we talk about the questions to bring up to their providers. I say, look, don't take no for an answer. If something is not right, you persist until you find out what's going on. Because even though we are diagnosing much more quickly than previously, there are still people of color who are not diagnosed, Black women and Black people who go undiagnosed or are often misdiagnosed, or delayed diagnosis. And when we talk about these gaps, when we talk about the gaps in treatment and the gaps in research and the gaps in healthcare, we have to acknowledge that the accessibility is not there for everyone. And until we can get to the bottom of that, and until we can open avenues and doors of accessibility, then I think we are going to continue on this road. Am I hopeful? I mean, do I see some really great momentum around this? Absolutely. And even in my years since my diagnosis and the things that I've been involved in with the organizations and, you know, the writing, I've seen us go leaps and bounds, but we're not there yet. We're not there yet. And until there is representation, until I see other people who resemble me, until the doors open, until we understand that people are not involved in research, not just because they don't want to be, but because there may be lack of accessibility, because they may be restricted from participating. Until we address all of these issues and all of these needs, then I think we are still chipping away at the bigger picture.
No, that's absolutely right. And I mean, there are so many layers at which systemic racism has influenced the way that these kinds of problems play out and or become that much harder to overcome, as you really eloquently put it there. Representation is a really, really important aspect of it at all stages of research, making sure that we do that from the research to figure out how the disease works to the clinical trials. And Valentina, can you talk a little bit about how you're working on that issue within the research at NYSCF?
Yes, and I also like to connect with what was saying Tim before, that basically when you have MS, it's like you get the diagnosis of MS when it's like a puzzle. Every multiple pieces of environmental factor and genetic factors are getting together. So we now know some of the environmental factors. We still don't understand quite well the complexity of the genetics, because it's not like either other diseases that are simple, with one gene, one mutation. This is, again, a combination of multiple genes. But here is where as a stem cell biologist, I'm very thrilled for what we think we are able to do now with the technology that is existing. So the idea of the work that we are doing at NYSCF is really to create stem cells from the patients. But when I mean patient, I mean multiple patients, a lot of patients, hundreds of patients. And so this is, patients, we also have a repository with general lines from healthy people or people with other diseases. And so we are making the effort at NYSCF for making a diverse panel, which includes all the ethnicities. And for our MS cohort, we do have some lines that were recruited by patients that were enrolled in different clinical trials that they could also donate, for example, blood or skin for us. So in that case, we relied on the people that were recruited for that study. But we now have an ongoing collaboration with Johns Hopkins and the MS Center of Peter Calabresi, where we are specifically recruiting people of African American patients. So I'm very optimistic that now that we are able to finally scale up, and this is something that was impossible before, because as I said, this research is really only a decade old. So first we learned how to make the stem cells, and now we built an NYSCF, this robotic platform that we can make hundreds of these cells. So for the first time, we are now reaching the moment where we have access to really having what we say, kind of our avatars in a dish. So really having a representation of all the population and of all the different ethnicities. And we are very much looking forward to dig in and dissect what is different between one ethnicity and another. So at the cellular level, again, this is not going to be the full answer because there are all the other components, and then there is the whole body, but at least one piece by piece. So I'm sure that we will be able to contribute with the genetic of the patient-specific cells, and we're going to make really important discoveries in this sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And can start to answer questions like, why is neurodegeneration so much more severe for Black patients? For
and
example,
how you can test.
Biologically, is there something going on at the cellular level we might be able to?
And the idea is also what we call clinical trial in a dish. So the idea is once we have our effort is to work on remyelinating strategies. Was mentioned before that right now the drugs currently that we have are mostly working on blocking the immune cells, but what we are working on is complementary treatments that would actually allow the regeneration of the myelin in the brain. And so, these drugs usually are tested only in animal models, but the idea that is, with the iPS cells, with patient-derived cells, is that the ability of testing them before with the patient cells, already testing of cells from different ethnicities. And so being able to understand which are the strong responders, which are the poor responders. And so, this would, we really hope that this is gonna improve the success of the development of the drug in development, because we will be able to really study its efficacy before giving it to a patient, but having given it to his cells.
Right, absolutely. I think that's a good segue into talking a bit more about treatments now, and sort of, how can we address the gaps in kind of what current treatments are able to do in the here and now. Karin, you mentioned that you've got all these fantastic patient innovators who are looking for these solutions that can really bring some more sort of immediate relief to patients. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, we just recently completed an innovation challenge and a summit in the area of multiple sclerosis, and we were lucky to have Teresa and Tim as two of our judges. So it was a great effort. We worked together with Bristol Myers Squibb, and we had sourced for patient entrepreneurs for about 6 weeks, and really tried to identify a number of companies that have been originated and led by individuals who are either living with MS or someone who is supporting someone directly with MS, who is not paid to support, being a care partner, being a spouse, a parent, a sibling, or so on. And we had a number of great applications. We narrowed it down to 10, and these individuals competed. And what was interesting, and I think Tim said it together with some of the other, we had a key opinion leader who was an incredible neurologist, as well as a venture capitalist on the panel, as well as a person who looks at the commercial potential of the product, which is important. Otherwise, we're not going to finance these opportunities. And what was interesting in this kind of group of finalists is that we saw potential for treating very severe MS as one category, as one kind of cohort, individuals who had built robots for the very progressive kinds of MS, where it's debilitating, not being able to use your arm, not able to use your hand, tools to be able to feed yourself. And that's incredibly important. But to Tim's point at the time, this is the kind of MS that we hope we don't have to see going forward, because we hope that we can diagnose earlier, we can prevent some of these very terrible consequences. But we still need to address it right now. So one of our competitors had just that, had built a AI-driven robot to address the functionality, the functional deficit of individuals with MS and long-standing MS. And then on the other side of the spectrum, we had individuals who were really trying to make lifestyle improvements for individuals with MS, who make it more livable, in the sense that most of the technologies that we need to acquire as patients are bulky, are gray, are have long manuals. And here we had a young woman trained at Parsons School of Design who created accessories for individuals with MS. And the potential for this company, is very big, in the sense that it could also be clothing. It could be not just cup holders and cups, but it could be interesting canes, or takes on various fashion accessories. And it sounds maybe like something that is not as high tech or as important, but to someone, and I'll let Teresa talk to it, but to someone who's living with MS, you actually want your environment and your world to be less. You don't want to feel like a patient. No one wants to be a patient. And the more you can feel that you are just another person in the world who is dealing with a issue, but you are also enjoying some of life's pleasures, it actually, I think, improves outcomes, because mental health is so important as well. Then we had another interesting, actually our winner was a young man whose father had MS, and he had come up with a very interesting approach to foot drop, which is a common cause, a common consequence to MS. And his approach was affordable, but still very functional. And it had the added benefit of having an AI feedback, so that the person could be trained, and it would be essentially a tool where the patient works with a therapist. So it had the benefit of not just addressing the actual foot drop, but the future walking training of the patient. So, with all these different technologies that were developed by patients, they all had that in common, was that they addressed a specific need that the individual who led the company had seen, and then said, okay, I'm N of one. Now I need to do some market research and see if there are more people who are actually dealing with this before I give up my day job and start a company. And that's what defines a patient entrepreneur. An advocate is one, you talk about your story, you make it really visible, it's really important. But then the patient entrepreneur says, okay, now it's actually addressing a larger population. And I've done that research, and now I'm gonna give up whatever I'm doing and create these businesses. So it's quite inspirational when you see them. Teresa, maybe you want to talk to what this lifestyle versus high tech, means to a person with the MS.
So the Innovation Summit was incredible. And again, what I found really fulfilling was seeing the patients take the active role in not only improving the quality of life for themselves or someone they love, but something that will be sustainable in the future. We all know that innovation, it breeds longevity. We move forward through science and innovation and technology. I can tell you about my heart history, and I can tell you how I'm still here today, whereas years ago, that may not have been possible. So this Lyfebulb challenge was very, very interesting. It was interactive. And again, what I thought about was accessibility, affordability, and what product would sustain, what would make life better, what would get me involved or someone else involved, and really be a participant in your life. And again, as I said before, that's what we want. We want active roles in our lives. And, I hear people say no one wants to be a patient, and that may be true. But for someone like me, I've always been a patient. So I've taken that word and I've empowered myself through being a patient and through my voice and through my experiences. And I know that just by living my life and living my truth and connecting, which Karin spoke about before, connecting with others, I know that that is what moves research, science, and humanity forward.
Teresa, that's wonderful. And we had a question come in about how patients like yourselves can help scientists, can help move this research forward. What advice would you have for other patients out there?
I would say to, have diverse, study the person, study the patient, talk to the patient, get real life questions, talk about what the patient wants you to know or what matters to the patient, what line of study the patient wants to talk about. Just get the patient involved and engaged. That's the beginning. And don't make assumptions. We know what we need. We know what we want. So a lot of times when you get the patient engaged and you ask them what matters to them, then sometimes that changes the focus.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
and I'd add, Raeka, that
Yeah.
that for people who are people living with MS who are looking to engage, I could definitely highly recommend engaging in the I Conquer MS community that Teresa is a part of. It's a remarkable community where individuals can actually participate in driving questions, creating opportunities. It's truly a people-powered research network with a real emphasis on the people. We are proud to collaborate with I Conquer MS, and certainly I would highly recommend, if there are folks on this webcast who want to participate, it's a terrific place to start. But there are other opportunities as well through the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute, which is another place where people can actually give a voice to some of the funding decisions that are made about the research that is going on.
Raeka, can I jump in one more time?
Please.
Absolutely. And I just want to say what drew me to I Conquer MS, and even what drew me to Karin with Lyfebulb, is the power of the patient voice. And, you know, I Conquer MS is, they have data, they have research studies, they have, you know, just opportunities for anyone to become engaged. And Karin, through Lyfebulb, you know, she empowers the patient voice. And, you know, that is what this is all about. And, you know, your organizations like yourself. So the future is optimistic, but it is going to take all of us. It is a multifaceted problem or issue. And the future looks bright, but we have to come together collectively to move forward. And we have to do so assuring that no one is left behind. And I think that's where the challenge lies.
Absolutely. Very well said. I think, you know, that'll set us up to sort of wrap up. Unfortunately, we've only got a couple of minutes left, but the last thing I'd like to hear from you about is sort of, what do we have to be optimistic about that's coming down the pipe? Do you think that there might be, you know, soon biomarkers coming up that will help us figure out which treatments will work for which people? Do we see stem cell therapies coming down, or what is it that makes you the most hopeful, and based on your field? Valentina, do you want to start?
Yeah, I see already the field has changed very much in the past years, and it's really moving toward a personalized medicine. So already we have different medications available, and so, you know, for different patients that can choose, and one can be best for one and one for another. But we now have a technology that, you know, we haven't had the chance to discuss here in this panel, but there are major new advances in the technologies that we are using for studying the cells, for studying really at single cell level. On one side, so we're going very, very small, and on the other side, we're able to scale up experiment very large, as we said before, you know, with hundreds of different lines and looking at every single cell. So I really think that in the next decade, we will be able to discover many biomarkers and many, you know, subtypes and understanding really how the diversity of, you know, the MS in the different patients, and coming up with approaches that are more and more personalized.
Absolutely. Tim, would you like to?
Yeah, so I'm optimistic that we'll have the tools we need to diagnose and monitor the disease much more quickly. Biomarkers are definitely in our future. I am optimistic that the treatments that we're developing, both for relapsing and progressive MS, are going to be yet more effective. And, you know, we'll aspire to, because of their effectiveness, make MS a smaller and smaller and smaller part of a person's life, day in and day out. We're not there yet, but I'm optimistic we can get there. But I'm also incredibly optimistic about the voice that Teresa and people affected by MS are bringing to really keep the light shining on how we address the hidden aspects of the disease, and both the hidden aspects of the disease related to people living with the disease today, but all of those other systemic issues that affect how people living with the disease get moved through the disease, and addressing the systemic barriers and societal barriers that get in the way of delivering the highest possible quality care. I see, you know, to Teresa's point, we can solve those, but we have to solve them by shining a light on them and then working together. But I'm optimistic, actually, that our community is able to do that. And so I think that is, for me, what I see is our future.
Very well put. Karin and Teresa, I'll ask you to give your last sort of weigh-ins on how you think, we can all work together more effectively, to fulfill that promise.
I'll just start because I think Teresa should finish. She's a great conclusion.
Absolutely, she is.
But I really believe that it's important to listen to the individuals who's living with the disease. And I think the fact that an institution like NYSCF that is so focused on stem cells and on science, deep science, and the fact that you have Valentina, who is an individual with MS. I mean, but that you're putting this together and you're allowing for the voice to be heard and bringing that to your community. I think that's great hope for the future. If we can have premier institutions that are focused on the research, and I'm talking about not just cell biology, not just cell therapy, CRISPR, gene therapy, but also computer science, mechanical engineering, social science, all these intellectual institutions. If we can start listening to those who are living with the disease and then coming together with a comprehensive approach that addresses the overall person, that's the goal, because it's not a one-shot solution. It's not going to be fixed. I go back to the 1.0 of the pancreas transplant. Having a pancreas transplant solves one issue of diabetes. It doesn't solve the whole problem. So, the same thing with MS. We need to address all the components, and we need more than just the biological science, and we need to listen to the patient. So that's my view. Teresa.
Thank you, Karin. That's really, really important. Yeah, Teresa.
Yes, and I will end with listen to the patient. When industry, nonprofits, HCPs, when we all come together to combat disease and work toward a cure, that's when change happens. I am very hopeful for the future. Every day is not a good day, but every day that I'm here means that something great can happen. And my hope as a patient is to one day see a cure. And not only see a cure, before we get there, my hope is to let people know that they aren't alone, that their experiences matter, and that their life matters, and that their voices matter. And I'm very hopeful about the future, and I will continue to do this work until I can't anymore.
Thank you so much, Teresa. I can't think of a better way to close us off and to hopefully leave us all leaving very hopeful about the future of MS therapies and cures. So I want to thank all of our panelists for a really fantastic discussion and for their great efforts in this area, and all of you for joining us. I apologize if we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but we really appreciate your participation and hope to see you again at another NYSCF event in the future. Thank you all and take care. Be well.